Director General of the IDSA, Your Excellencies, distinguished participants of this seminar, ladies and gentlemen. I am indeed happy to have the opportunity to speak at this National Export Control Seminar today, which is being organized jointly by the Ministry of External Affairs and the Institute for Defense Studies and Analyses. I would like to thank the TG-IDSA for the excellent arrangements his institute has put in place and for bringing together, as we were just told by him, such a wide range of participants, government officials from all departments dealing with export controls, representatives from industry, analysts and scholars from the research and academic communities, as well as foreign experts, all of who will be participating in today's deliberations. I would like to recognize the presence of members of the diplomatic corps, in particular representatives of countries who are currently chairing the various multilateral export control regimes. Let me begin by addressing a simple but fundamental question. Why are export controls important for India? We have for long recognized the challenge proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery poses for our national security and for world order. The danger of terrorists gaining access to WMDs has added another facet to this grave threat. At the same time, as a responsible member, India is committed to promoting and working with the international community in advancing the common objectives of global non-proliferation and international security. Flowing from these considerations of national and international security, and as a state possessing advanced and sensitive materials and technology ourselves, we are conscious of the need for responsible handling of these sensitive items from the point of production or manufacture to their use internally or their export abroad and eventual safe and secure disposition. India has no interest whatsoever in aiding or abetting proliferation of WMDs, the misuse of dual-use items, or in non-state actors or terrorists gaining access to sensitive items. On the contrary, we view a strong and effective national export control system as an essential link between our broader national security goals and our wider foreign policy objectives. There is a second and equally compelling rationale for export controls. Just as export controls are vital for national security and global non-proliferation objectives, they are also essential for the pursuit of growth and national development by harnessing the benefits of globalization. Export control standards are increasingly the norm for global trade in sensitive material, equipment, and technology, and thus necessary if we are to increase the quantum of high technology items in our external trade and commercial exchanges. As India's integration with global trade patterns and supply chains deepens, it would increasingly become an important hub of manufacturing and export of high technology items itself. Foreign investment, including through offsets for governmental procurement, will strengthen these global links. Our export control system would thus add to reliability and credibility of Indian companies in the global market and increase their competitive edge. High technology companies would invest in India, confident that apart from favorable commercial returns, access to a huge market and skilled workforce and the protection of intellectual property rights, there would be no risk of unauthorized diversion or the exports. That export controls are an added burden on industry is a mistaken and short-sighted notion. At the same time, government is conscious that there should be no unreasonable restrictions on legitimate trade and commercial activities, and export control procedures should be clear and implementable without undue delays. Let me describe briefly India's export control framework. The director has already given us some introduction to this. India has a law-based export system covering about 9 different legislations. I will mention only the most important. They are the Foreign Trade Development and Regulation Act, or FTDR, of 1992, the Atomic Energy Act of 1962, the Customs Act also of 1962, and the Weapons of Mass Destruction Act of 2005. Systematic dual-use control lists in India were first notified in 1995 and were named as SMET, Special Material, Equipment and Technology, published under the Foreign Trade Act. This list has subsequently been revised in 1999, 2005 and 2007 and is today widely known as SCOMET, Specialized Chemicals, Organisms, Material, Equipment and Technology List. I would like to highlight a few points with respect to more recent developments. The WMD Act of 2005 incorporated into national legislation key international standards in export controls covering technology transfers, end user or catch-all controls, brokering, transshipment and transit controls. In 2010, these changes were translated into the Foreign Trade Act through an amendment adopted by our Parliament, which widened the ambit of dual-use controls. Second, the harmonization of SCOMET controls with the Nuclear Suppliers Group and Missile Technology Control Regime Guidelines and their annexes was notified in 2008. Our export controls are thus in line with the highest international standards, and in some cases, in view of the generic coverage of controlled items or controls at the stage of manufacturing, they indeed extend beyond the controls of the multilateral regimes. Third, our regulatory framework is updated regularly. For example, following the adoption of UN Security Council Resolutions 1874 and 1929. Fourth, we have increased engagement with various countries and our participation in international and regional export control seminars and conferences. This engagement includes the 4 multilateral export control regimes, to which I will return a little bit later in this speech. In terms of implementation, an interministerial working group coordinated by the Directorate General of Foreign Trade administers the SCOMET regulations. The regulations outline the procedure, process, and the factors relating to the licensing of controlled items. The licensing process is rigorous and involves assessment of export applications by various departments. Due restraint and responsibility in the transfer of sensitive systems and technologies is exercised based on a dynamic risk assessment system and changing proliferation trends around the world. It is true that any export control system is only as good as its enforcement on the ground. Our national enforcement mechanisms cover prevention, detection, and the penalization of unauthorized exports. Customs and other enforcement agencies are active participants in these efforts. These activities are coordinated through an interagency core group which meets periodically to review these issues. As part of our regular review of implementation of export controls, we are looking at updating our control lists, strengthening national capacity through training for enforcement officials, commodity identification support, and installation of detection equipment at ports and border checkpoints and other measures. The DGFT is in the process of introducing by June this year an online application system that would not only further ease the application process but also facilitate implementation. We believe that our industry is the first line of defense in terms of effective export controls. Industry outreach is an important area not only to enhance understanding about export controls among producers and exporters of controlled items, but also to share best practices in internal control systems for due diligence at the level of the companies. This requires a continuous effort in various parts of the country, involving even small and medium enterprises, and industry leadership is important, and the Ministry of External Affairs was pleased to support a CII, or Confederation of Indian Industry, event last month on export controls. I'm glad to note that the CII is currently working on a voluntary code of conduct on export controls, which can serve as a useful guide as companies work on strengthening their own internal compliance systems. India is also open to cooperating with other countries in the sharing of experiences and best practices on export controls. With this brief survey of the national scene, let me now return to the international aspects of export controls. India shares global non-proliferation objectives and supports strengthening the non-proliferation regime. Since 2002, we have been piloting a UN First Committee resolution on measures to prevent terrorists from acquiring WMDs, which is traditionally adopted by consensus. We supported the extension of the mandate of the 1540 Committee pursuant to Resolution 1540. An eminent Indian expert indeed worked as part of the expert group of the 1540 Committee from 2007 to 2009. We have also announced our intention to host a UNSCR 1540 workshop to strengthen the implementation of the resolution. India has contributed to the success of the Nuclear Security Summit process. Our Prime Minister has participated in both the summits held in Washington in April 2010 and in Seoul in March 2012. In January this year, I hosted a Sherpa meeting involving more than 50 countries in New Delhi to prepare for the Seoul Nuclear Security Summit. India has joined the global initiative to combat nuclear terrorism and participates in all its activities. India has also participated in the preparatory process for negotiating an arms trade treaty at the UN. India is in full compliance with its obligations as a state party to the Chemical Weapons Convention and the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. India's impeccable non-proliferation record has been widely recognized and was reflected in the milestone NSG decision of September 2008 on civil nuclear cooperation with India. With respect to India's implementation of the Statement on Civil Nuclear Cooperation, I would like to mention the following. First, India concluded the Safeguards Agreement with the IAEA, which entered into force in May 2009. Second, an additional protocol was also approved by the Board of Governors in March 2009 and signed in May 2009. India is committed to its ratification as soon as our necessary internal preparatory work is completed. With respect to the implementation of the separation plan, we have already put 12 out of 14 reactors under IAEA safeguards. Only 2 more reactors are required to be notified by 2014. India has signed civil nuclear cooperation agreements with France, USA, Russia, Canada, Argentina, the UK, Namibia, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and the Republic of Korea. Negotiations are taking place with Japan on a bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement. India and the United States signed an agreement setting out arrangements and procedures for reprocessing pursuant to their bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement in July 2010. India has adhered to the NSG and MTCR guidelines and will maintain this adherence. India has continued with its policy of refraining from transfer of enrichment and reprocessing technologies to states that do not possess them, and supporting international efforts to limit their spread. We supported the establishment of an IAEA fuel bank resolution contained in GOV 2010-68, adopted by the IAEA board in December 2010, and resolution GOV 2011-16, adopted by the Board of Governors in March 2011. India has the capabilities to be a supplier state. Fifth, India has a long-standing commitment to complete universal, non-discriminatory and verifiable elimination of nuclear weapons in a time-bound manner, a vision that was set forth in the Rajiv Gandhi Action Plan. We remain committed to a voluntary and unilateral moratorium on nuclear explosive testing. We are also committed to work together for the commencement of negotiations in the Conference on Disarmament on a multilateral, universal, non-discriminatory and verifiable fissile material cutoff treaty. To sum up, India has a consistent record of implementation of its voluntary commitments and has made progress since September 2008 in the implementation of the Civil Nuclear Initiative. In November 2010, India expressed interest in taking forward this engagement with the international community to the next phase of seeking membership of the 4 export control regimes, the NSG, the MTCR, the Australia Group, and the Wassenaar arrangement. We are aware that there are regime specificities in each one of them. Each regime has its own membership criteria, its own control lists and methodology of work. But at the same time, there are underlying objectives and principles which are common to all the regimes to which India subscribes fully, as it has demonstrated responsible non-proliferation and export control practices, and has shown the ability and willingness to contribute substantially to global non-proliferation objectives. In this sense, India is a like-minded country that shares the same objectives and goals of these groups. Further, in a material sense, given the size of India's industry and its projected growth, it is clear that India has the ability to produce, manufacture, or supply a vast majority of items that are controlled by these regimes. As India's integration with the global supply chains moves forward, it would be in the interest of the 4 regimes that India's exports are subject to the same framework as other major supplier countries. Thirdly, India has the ability to enforce a legally based domestic export control system which gives effect to the commitment to act in accordance with the respective guidelines of these regimes. Finally, India has developed considerable experience in the implementation of its export control system. We have witnessed instances of would-be proliferators targeting India to source or route their supplies. Our agencies have taken appropriate preventive action in such cases. We believe that India's participation in the discussions relating to proliferation assessments, trends, licensing experiences, and enforcement issues, and so on, will be mutually beneficial. We appreciate the support extended by a number of countries for the objective of India's full membership of the 4 export control regimes, in particular the United States, the Russian Federation, and France. While we wish to move forward in tandem on all the 4 regimes, our engagement